Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Stress Less, Enjoy More, Reducing Stress and Increasing Happiness. I am Amr Said, a liaison at the Family Resource Center. I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today, Dr. Heather Tedesco, PhD. She is a licensed applied psychologist with a PhD in social psychology and a well-known parenting expert based in the Washington, D.C. area. She is the co-author of the popular parenting book, Raising a Kid Who Can, Simple Strategies to Build a Lifetime of Adaptability and Emotional Strength. She is a sought-after speaker known for her ability to provide highly engaging talks packed with science and practical strategies, leaving audience informed, encouraged, and inspired. Dr. Tedesco also maintains a private practice in McLean, Virginia, where she works exclusively with parents to help them raise kids who can and can strive while making parenting less stress, more effective, and more enjoyable. We are so excited to have you this morning with us, Dr. Tedesco. Please take it away.
Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today. And I'm excited to be here. I am an FCPS parent myself, almost 20 years now at this point of having kids in FCPS. And I'm excited to be able to share this really important topic. A few things just to know in terms of parenting. There are no perfect parents for sure. I am not one, and that's good because we want to teach our kids how to be human. We don't want them to strive too much in terms of expecting perfection out of themselves or others, because that goes directly to the stress and anxiety that we're trying to prevent. You know that it is hard to be a parent. There is so much pressure on parents, and I could make the argument that our current sort of zeitgeist with technology's advances is making it even more challenging. Along with that, our kids keep changing. There are a lot of different developmental stages that they go through during their, kind of 0 to 18 years. And so you may have had that feeling where things sort of seem to be in a good groove with your kids. And then all of a sudden, something seems to shift and go off the rails, and you're not imagining it. Our kids do keep changing. There is a lot of parenting information out there in the world. It is not all high quality. It is not all evidence-based. And so that's really my mission, is to try to bring, the information that is sort of proven and trustworthy to parents. I'm also a huge believer that, we are each parents to our own children, and we can and should hopefully share our own values, goals, priorities with our kids and not be afraid to follow kind of what our inner compass is and not be too driven by what the rest of the world is telling us to do. And again, I'm a big believer in research, and so that's what I'm excited to share with you today is evidence-based parenting strategies and information and tools. So I co-wrote a book that I'll mention a little bit as I go today, and many of the illustrations in my talk today that are in these kind of line drawing formats come directly from the book. And one of the things that we talk about as sort of our orientation toward parenting is this idea of a bird on the branch. And so if you imagine yourself as sort of that parent bird up there on the branch, and you see, we're going to sort of assume that the parent bird is not afraid about that branch breaking. So much of the time as parents, I think we get distracted by trying to do all of the things to make the branch really strong and to pick the best tree and to, make sure that we're trying to control the weather, when in reality, what we really need to do is to equip our baby birds to fly. And so it's not, even though we want to sort of look externally and try and make the world an easier place, really it's all about helping our kids, kind of have the internal resources. So what I'm going to cover today, this is just a little bit of an overview. Don't worry, I'm going to go through each of these things one by one. But there is a lot we can do in terms of reducing stress for our kids and for ourselves, and increasing happiness. And so, we're going to dive right in. And I want to, sort of say a quick word about stress versus anxiety, because I am going to be talking about both. Stress is really tends to be something that is caused by an external trigger. It's short term. There's a test, a deadline, some sort of an event that, kind of makes us feel stressed. And then when that event ends, the stress generally goes away. Anxiety is an internal response that doesn't have to have an external stressor, and it tends to be much more persistent, and it can, sort of be larger and, kind of more excessive, and, kind of a sense of fear and worry. And so they're related enough that, they're interchangeable-ish. And so I'm gonna, kind of give you guidelines about both, but I just want to make sure that we cover that, because we're going to, kind of at a basic level, anxiety is sort of built on persistent stress. And so let's talk about what stress does to the body. It does not feel great. We are built, sort of hardwired to be able to survive, kind of a short-term, threat to our, to our ability to survive. So what happens is a whole chain of physiological responses called the fight or flight response. It's a sympathetic nervous system. And, we have all of these very cleverly designed reactions that prevent us from overthinking and allow us to act, and, sort of mobilize our energy into the places that help us the most. And so this is sort of the response that we don't pick. It's automatic. And, it kind of happens, when we perceive a threat. One little piece of brain science, just to kind of ground this. If you look at that drawing of the brain, the very front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, you may have heard of that. That's sort of we call it the boss of the brain in our book. It's sort of all of our executive functionings. It's our rational thought. It's our logic. It is the part of the brain that is not very helpful if you are trying to run for your life. And so when we are stressed, that part of the brain tends to go a little bit quiet. And instead, the amygdala, which is depicted there as a smoke detector, it's our threat detector. And so when we perceive a threat, when we feel stressed, that amygdala goes off and says, warning, 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 danger. The challenge for us is that our amygdala has not evolved particularly, and it fires off the same sort of fight or flight response when we are being, kind of chased by a bear or a tiger, as when, our children have a test, or we have a deadline, or something that makes us a little bit stressed or anxious. So we can't, kind of rewire human beings. We need to work with them. Another thing about stress and anxiety in particular that is unique to humans, we think, and has to do with that prefrontal cortex, is that we are not just having that nervous system response when we are faced with an actual threat, but even just thinking about a threat or a perceived threat kind of triggers that same reaction in our body. And this anticipatory anxiety is what can really get in the way. So again, stress is sort of a short-term external stressor. Anxiety is when we feel sort of threatened just even by thinking about it. Our body reacts. The other things there, I'm going to give a few notes about anxiety, and I'm happy to take questions on it at the end. But one of the challenges about anxiety is, again, it does not feel great to feel afraid, to feel anxious. All of those changes in our nervous system are generally unpleasant. And so as human beings, we're kind of hardwired to try not to feel that way. And the easiest way not to feel that is to avoid whatever makes us afraid, which is great when it's, a bear chasing us in the woods. It is not great when it is our kids who have a spelling test every week. We don't want them to sort of get into sort of the cycle of avoidance where they feel afraid. It makes them naturally want to avoid it. If they do avoid it, that just reinforces and strengthens the fear of that spelling test or other thing, which makes them want to avoid it even more. And it's what grows that anxiety. So as parents, we want to be aware of that, and we want to really try not to help our kids accidentally avoid the things that frighten them. And anxiety is unpleasant for everyone, for the kids and the parents. And so we have to really be informed and work not to kind of accidentally collude with the anxiety. How do we do that? Essentially, we want to help our kids with our loving support face in whatever increment they can the thing that is scary for them. We don't want to accidentally shield them from it. We don't want to accidentally accommodate or change the situation for them too much. We don't want to even over reassure them about things that we can't be certain of. There's a lot more to the idea of anxiety, and I will say that it is very treatable, but it's also pretty counterintuitive. And so it's often difficult for us as parents. All of the things that we do as loving, attuned, invested parents, when we're doing them to our child's anxiety, they tend to help the anxiety and not help the child. So I would encourage you, if you find yourself where your child has more than what we would consider stresses, and it's in sort of this cycle of anxiety, to get some help, to get some education about it. There's a lot of great resources out there. Going back to stress, which is what I'm going to focus, kind of more in the what I'll call garden variety. If there are stresses that are frequent enough, we do tend to show physical signs of it. And our kids in particular tend to show physical signs that are often very confusing for parents. Stomach aches and headaches are extremely common, especially in younger kids, although they persist in all ages of kids. Again, that has to do with what's happening in the body when that amygdala fires off the warning signal and the fight and flight response comes. But other things that can happen, this idea of procrastination, I hear a lot from parents that I work with that their child doesn't seem motivated, that they don't seem to care. That can be a reaction to stress. For sure, outbursts, anger, irritability, all of these things, that can be very disruptive and external, can be a result of feeling stressed. And you can kind of read on down the line. Obviously, sort of the bigger and more persistent the stress, the more likely we are to get to, kind of the more serious issues at the bottom. But it's helpful for us as parents to consider when our kids are having sort of these behavioral issues or, kind of physical health issues, whether or not we think stress might be a factor. A couple more messages just to keep in mind. That comic is very tongue-in-cheek because we don't want to have our kids be under chronic stress. There is a lot of research, not just about the mental health challenges that stress can lead to, anxiety, depression, and a whole bunch of risky behaviors, but our bodies actually break down. There's a lot of research about what happens to blood pressure and our arteries and all kinds of things if we're under chronic stress. With our kids, we want to be really aware that they are in this incredible moment, and it really is about a 25-year moment of brain development, where their brains are being molded and shaped and wired. That's going to have an impact lifelong. There is some research that we can change the brain a little bit as we get older, but they are in like peak prime sculptability. And so, we want them to be having the kinds of positive, healthy experiences during these impactful years. And so chronic stress is not the way we want brains to be shaped. You'll hear me mention sleep again. I cannot say it strongly enough. The research on sleep's effects on our health are absolutely amazing. And so it's a hard thing for parents to prioritize, to be honest. There are a whole lot of environmental things that kind of get in the way of our kids being able to get enough sleep. But it really is important if we're considering our kids' stress levels. And then again, it's on us as parents, as caregivers, as people invested in our youth, to make sure that we don't accidentally fall into that kind of pattern of glorifying chronic stress that this cartoon illustrates. We don't want to we want to think a little bit about the messages we're giving. Are we getting enough rest? Are we sort of burning the candle at both ends? Do we really believe that more is more? We are powerful messengers to kids. And so what we can do is help them learn about their bodies, learn about their emotions, learn about their stress response, and learn ways to reduce anxiety when it appears, because it is part of the human condition. So let's talk about how we do that. Psychologists like me, will often kind of divide kind of coping mechanisms, meaning the ways that we respond when we are stressed, into, kind of positive or negative. You've already heard me talk about some of these negative things. The default that we as human beings are wired with is to avoid. It is not helpful, as I mentioned earlier. Avoiding when we are stressed or anxious can just increase the fear. And so even though that's kind of our baseline default, we want to help our kids learn to grow and beyond that. And you can see there are many other things, and this could be a much longer list, to be honest, of ways that are not helpful in reducing stress and anxiety. That's sort of what makes them negative. Positive coping methods. Again, there are almost an infinite number of these. There are a couple at the top that you've probably heard about. The research is quite profound. The only way that we have to actually turn off that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response is by taking very deep and controlled breaths. We can't have both that rapid racing heartbeat and slow and, kind of deliberately controlled breathing simultaneously. However, I have worked with, thousands of families, and I have yet to find one who can get, especially a very young child who is in the throes of a fight or flight response, to do that kind of breathing on command. It's hard for us adults to do. I still encourage you to help your kids learn, kind of in the downtime of life, drives or bedtime or whatnot, to learn how to regulate their breathing. But I would encourage you not to just put all your eggs in the breathing basket, if you will. The same thing, mindfulness meditation, very effective. Not, they take time and practice. So let's talk about things that are a little bit more accessible for our kids, whether they're young, whether they're teens. Physical activity is a really great coping method. Oftentimes when I'm working with parents whose kids have, more stress or anxiety, we look for ways for them to be in the heat of the moment, to have something physical to do, whether it's, take a lap around the house, or, kind of go up and down some stairs, or, do jumping jacks, anything like that might be available. Our bodies are hardwired to be calmer outdoors than we are indoors. And so just the act of stepping outside. Sometimes with kids, we can ask them to give us a weather report, where we try to introduce a little bit of mindfulness. We ask them to tell us, something. What does the temperature feel like? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you see? If you happen to have a pet, especially a furry one, there is research that pets can also help calm our nervous system. And then we get into things like music, art, dance. Some kids are, giving them the ability to play music, either, recorded music, or if you have a musical instrument, to play their own music. Some kids really like to color and draw, and we create little calm down corners that they can use with special, coloring books, or special prized books that they get to look at that can help them in those moments. Any kind of creative expression. And then we're social animals as human beings. And so connecting with others, whether it be parents, or if they're a little bit older, sometimes friends, those are all things that can help kids. And so the research is quite clear that the more we are able to access sort of these healthier, positive coping methods, the less we rely on sort of the negative, risky things. Next thing that can help in terms of, kind of decreasing stress and increasing happiness goes back to that bird on a branch. How do we equip the bird? And so I have two wonderful co-authors, Dr. Catherine McCarthy, who's a child psychiatrist, and Jennifer Weaver, who is a wonderful child and adolescent therapist. And, we've sort of combed through all of the research and given, all of our best strategies. And we boiled everything down to sort of these 10 essentials for thriving. And so many of them are relevant that you're going to hear me talk about quite a few of them today. If you're interested in learning more, we did do a webinar about a year ago that I think you'll be able to access later if you want. But I want to talk about sort of this very first essential, which is sometimes surprising because it's not really a psychological essential, and yet the foundation of our well-being, of, kind of not being overly stressed, being, sort of happy and thriving, really has to do with what we call the 3 Rs: rest, recreation, and routine. I could talk much more about these, but I'll just give you sort of one nugget for each one of these. Again, there is no magic wand, in human beings, but if I had to pick one, it would be sleep. And it is proven to be a natural inhibitor of anxiety. We are more calm when we have had enough sleep. And you can see, kind of some of the statistics over there. Recreation, again, movement, it improves our mood, it lowers our stress and anxiety, making sure even in these colder months that, there's some activity, ideally some outdoor activity, is really, really valuable. If your child comes home from school kind of drained and dysregulated, it's amazing what 10 minutes of outside time doing something fun and playful and, movement centered can do. And then routine, it really does help the brain relax. Some kids really benefit from this, even more than others, but having some sense of control is really important for kids. I am not going to dive too much into technology, although we could surely spend a very long time on it. Just to mention that technology has great aspects of it. There are many great things, but it does tend to interfere if it is not, sort of being thoughtfully managed. And the reason for that has to do with dopamine, which is a neurochemical that's like our reward, kind of like yes, kind of neurochemical. And many of our technology things, especially the games and the social media that tend to draw in kids, they tend to give these sort of dopamine hits frequently. And that keeps them exciting. It keeps them engaging, but it also keeps kids, sort of coming back for more. And what's a little bit harder to see is that it makes all of the other activities in daily life, even the fun ones, like, doing puzzles or board games or other things like that, it makes them a little bit more boring by comparison because they don't provide such a steady and frequent hit of that dopamine. And so everything in balance, everything in moderation. There's no sort of all or nothing in human thriving. And so we want to make sure that we are being thoughtful in the technology use of our kids. Another thing that's incredibly helpful for us parents to be thoughtful about is what we call the motivation machine. And, this is an incredibly well-researched and validated kind of theory of human motivation that I think every parent benefits from knowing, because when we're helping our kids, we want to be, kind of helping them be motivated, and we want them to be intrinsically motivated, meaning that they are deciding for themselves to do things. They're not doing it because they're getting rewarded or punished or because we're telling them to. We want them to, sort of develop their own compass about doing things. So I'm going to quickly talk about each of these 3 keys to motivation. One of them is competence. This is, teachers are great about this. They call it a strengths-based approach. And the idea is that we want our kids to feel very grounded in what they already can do. We want to make sure that they feel capable, because when we feel capable, that gives us confidence to try new things. And so even when there are big challenges with a child, and I'm working with parents, we generally want to start by figuring out what's going well. As parents, we often forget, it's just human nature, we forget to put a lot of attention on what's going well and what the strengths are. And instead, we want to dive right into the sort of problem areas. But really, our kids need to feel very grounded in their own capability and competence. Connection is hugely important, and I am actually going to talk a bit more about this in a minute. But our kids really need to feel connected to loving, caring adults who really, get them and see them as they are. And then this third of the motivators is autonomy. This is a good thing. This is what gets the birds to fly away eventually. We want them to feel a sense of control. We want them to want to be in control. And so, it's something that we can't really fight. And, good parenting strategies usually try to increase our kids' autonomy in appropriate levels, along with sort of some guardrails and some guidelines. I want to highlight connections a little bit more because it is so closely tied to, sort of resilience and stress management. And if you're listening to me today, there is no question. I don't question that any parent has an unconditionally loving bond for their children. That's not the hard part. The hard part is staying current on our kids and staying curious about our kids, because remember those different developmental stages that they are going to change over and over and over again during this time, that they're at FCPS. And as parents, it is really easy to get frozen in time and to not be able to keep pace. It is really easy to like jump ahead and to use our big, prefrontal cortexes to imagine what our child might be like down the road and to really, kind of not be right in the moment. And so there are some ways to do this that can help, some little, tips, if you will. And, the best one is to just be curious and ask questions. You may know the answer. That's okay, but it's important for your child to become the expert on themselves and to be able to share with you and with others the things that matter to them. And so open-ended questions. What do you think about this? What's exciting to you? Asking them things and listening carefully to their answers and trying to like pause our own assumptions and expectations is really valuable to strengthen connections with kids. And again, we will sometimes tell parents to to practice being a Jeopardy contestant, right? Even when you have great ideas for your kids, put them in the form of a question so that our kids have the chance to weigh in and to consider it. And, that's going to help them feel like you get them and feel like you care about, kind of where they are today. I'm going to talk in more detail about this idea of building resilience because resilience directly increases our capacity to handle stress. And so when we look at sort of how do we stress less, one of the things we can do is reduce stressors. But we can't reduce every stressor, and we don't necessarily want to, because again, that's part of human existence. We want to help our kids learn how to function in the wider world. And so another approach we can take, and I advocate for both, is to increase our kids' resilience, increase their capacity to manage stress. And so one of the things that they need to do is they need to recognize that challenges and struggles are okay. They're not to be avoided. They are actually opportunities. And so, having that mindset, a growth mindset, as Carol Dweck and others talk about, is really important. And for us as parents and caregivers, I say practice the pause. And what I really mean is to do less rather than more. And it's so difficult because we want to help. We want to jump in. We often have ideas of how to jump in and help. And yet, for our kids to be resilient, they have to feel that sense of ownership, that autonomy, and that control. And so, if we, as deeply loving parents, are accidentally trying to do too much for our kids, and in particular, are doing things for them that they really are developmentally and individually capable of doing for themselves, we are chipping away at that resilience. We aren't increasing and growing it. So we really, it's a very hard thing to do, but we really need to kind of check ourselves and hit the pause button before we swoop in and try to act and help. One of the things we talk a lot about in our book is how to help kids tolerate difficult feelings. Because it's really challenging, right? When we see our kids in distress, when they are angry or hurt or afraid, we want to do something about it. For our kids, when they are feeling these big feelings, and for kids, their perception of emotion is often very heightened because their brain develops the emotional parts of the brain. They kind of reach adult maturity first. And kind of that prefrontal cortex that we sometimes think of as the brakes of the brain, the ability to put things into context and to extrapolate and to, sort of use logic and reason to think our way through things, that develops much later, at least fully matures much later. And so our kids are spending more of their time feeling bigger feelings than we adults often are. And so they can look like wildly irrational to us, but it's completely understandable and appropriate for them in their developmental stages. And so our kids have these big feelings. And just like with fear and, sort of that survival instinct, often they want to avoid them. They don't want to feel afraid and hurt and sad and angry. And we also often as parents don't want them to feel those things. And so everybody wants to avoid it. However, what we know is that in order for feelings to pass, we actually have to accept those feelings and then they will pass. And so in order for the feelings to shift and change, that's what we want to do. So a great way to help your kids learn this, they will imagine their feelings as something like a cave, meaning they think that there are these big, scary feelings. They want to avoid it because they don't have any idea how to make them stop. Instead, if we just talk to our kids about their feelings being more of a tunnel, it's still dark and scary. You're still working your way through these, kind of negative feelings, these painful experiences. But if you can help your kids see that, again, accepting those feelings rather than fighting or avoiding them is the catalyst for those feelings to change, to shift, and to pass. We don't know how long any of these tunnels are. We can't promise our kids that we can take away the uncertainty of life. We really want to make our kids adaptable enough to deal with the uncertainty. But it is a different world if our kids know and trust that the feelings will pass than if they think the feelings are a permanent, pervasive trap. Another thing we talk about in the book that can be quite helpful for our kids when they're having these difficult feelings is a validation sandwich. And this is really useful for anxious kids in particular, although it works in all different kinds of relationship situations. So what we don't want to do is to try to change our kids' feelings. We don't want to fix them. We don't want to downplay their feelings and say, oh, that's not that scary. It's okay. And we don't want to try to cheer them up out of their feelings. Like, oh, you didn't actually want to make that. You didn't want to roll in that play. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Instead, we want to make sure that we are both validating their feelings and expressing confidence in them, in their ability to handle it. When we think about resilience, it is that belief that we are capable. And so how does this sound? A validation sandwich, sort of, here's your formula. You start off with the validation, which is something along the lines of, I see how hard this is. I see how frustrated you are. I hear how angry you are. We have to acknowledge, again, accepted feelings are the ones that can shift. However, here's the critical part. Most of us as loving parents want to fix it. We want to do something. We want to minimize it. We want to offer a solution. We want to make it better. And yet, what's the most powerful and effective thing to do is to express confidence. I know you can handle this. Oh, I see how hard this is right now, but I believe in you. I know you will be okay. But wow, I see this is so hard for you. So that's sort of a little formula just to keep in mind. Another thing to know in terms of building resistance, and this is often, I think, one of the very hardest things to do as a parent, is to bear witness, to sit with our kids in their pain. They benefit from our presence. They don't necessarily benefit from our, action. And so if we can just keep them company validate, empathize, but not try to fix, that communicates to our kids in a truly powerful way that we believe in them. We believe they are strong enough to handle it. We believe that the hard time will get better. And it is excruciating, but incredibly powerful. Another idea to, kind of keep in mind as parents and to help your kids with. There's fascinating research that I found once in the city of Boston, that people that walk daily on these cobblestone streets actually experience health benefits, that they have, that they found some sort of cardiovascular benefits to having to walk over these bumpy streets over and over again. And, it's worth remembering that this mindset of bumps are opportunities for growth. They are not, sort of irritants that we want to eradicate. They are actually, kind of ways for our kids to, with our loving help and support and guidance, grow stronger. And, do I think some of these people in Boston twisted an ankle here and there? I am sure they did. But the goal isn't to prevent all of the things that can go wrong in the world. The goal is to strengthen our kids so that they are better able to handle it. And so that brings me to a really important and, uncomfortable topic around failure and our kids failing. And again, we don't have to like it, but when we're trying to think about how to reduce our kids' stress, fear of failure is incredibly stressful. And we live in a world where there is so much external eyes on performance, that not just with grades, but in every different direction, our kids are being sort of measured and judged, and often commented on by the wider world, and that can create challenges. We see a lot more perfectionism. We see a lot more anxiety in our youth than we used to. And so as parents and caregivers, we can really focus on this idea of failure and how to kind of put it into perspective for our kids. If they can learn that it is inevitable, you will fail, as even Albert Einstein has, pointed out to us, and that it can be a good thing. It's an opportunity for growth. We don't have to love it. We don't have to crave it or welcome it, but we do need to not fear it and not try to avoid it. And again, as loving adults in kids' lives, we want to be there when they fail. We want to be there when they're having hard times, not so we can fix it, but so that we are able to offer them the support, offer them those votes of confidence, offer them that validation and empathy. And so what often happen, I shouldn't say often, what can happen to incredibly engaged, loving parents is that they get trapped in this cycle where they believe that their job is to help their kids as much as possible. It's a very loving goal. And where they are, a little uncomfortable with things going badly. And really what we want to do is to, kind of give our kids these opportunities as from the youngest ages on, so that we normalize it and so that it loses its, sort of fear potential. And, it's one of those where when parents sort of say, when's the best time to let my child, suffer a consequence or to make a mistake or to fail? My answer is always now. Whenever your child, whatever age your child is, now is the time, because we don't want to prevent it, so that when they finally leave and head out into that wider world, they are experiencing these difficult moments, emotions, situations without us, kind of being there to observe and to guide and to support. So it is uncomfortable, and it is really incumbent on us as adults to look at our own internal feelings. There is no judgment here. I promise you, we all as loving parents have fears for our kids, and we have to acknowledge them in order to accept them and to minimize them. These are sort of classic anxiety questions that often we will ask to people who are anxious, kids or adults. And it's useful for us as parents to ask too. What is the worst that will happen if they miss an assignment, if they forget their library book, if they blow, a major exam? What is the worst that can happen? Can they survive it? What is my role here? If you need inspiration, I highly recommend, I don't care how old your child is, this Oh, the Places You Go. It actually is quite a popular graduation book for a very good reason, because it contains so much wisdom, including these passages that really do a brilliant job of normalizing and validating the fact that struggle happens, mistakes happen, and that we don't need to prevent it because it's all part of the human experience. Independence, I have a whole hour talk just about how to encourage independence. So believe me, this is like the very bottom line nutshells. But a couple of basic rules to think about. And why is independence important when we're thinking about helping our kids stress less? It goes back to that autonomy, that feeling of control does make us feel more calm, less stressed. And so the very bottom line is that we want our kids to experience an increase in both freedom and responsibility, kind of together over time. And so we want to continually be thinking about first of all, what are the freedoms that they care about? Oftentimes I get parents saying, but I'm letting them do all these things. But if it's not something that matters to your child, it's not having the impact that you think it will be. And so go back to the connection, go back to the questions and the curiosity, and find out what would your kid like to be able to do. And think about what are the life skills, what are the responsibilities that you want to pair with that, and help them, kind of slowly, gradually over time, become more and more independent. Part of being independent is being responsible themselves for how the outcome goes, both good and bad. Again, we're not talking about punishment. Punishment is punitive, it is reactive, it is after the fact. It is not very useful from a learning standpoint. It's actually fear-inducing. We want to make this much more the idea of natural consequences. And if they are imposed consequences, we want kids to know ahead of time what's going to happen. If you have a teenager and they keep missing curfew, they're perhaps going to lose some freedom to be going out with their friends, or they're going to have to come home earlier, something like that. But we want to give our kids, for them to really become independent and to get all of the wonderful psychological benefits of it, they need to feel responsible. It doesn't mean that they don't need coaching. And again, if a kid is not succeeding and we have to take sort of a step backward, that's the moment to help teach them and to encourage them and to build them back up. We do want to be more spectators on the sidelines than, sort of players running around the metaphorical soccer field with our kids. That can be hard. Oftentimes we are out there like running in as a reinforcement before we even think about it. My dear friends, Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson talk about being a consultant. That's a helpful metaphor, I think, for what we want to be doing as parents to help our kids become more and more independent. Again, the goal is to have our, kind of metaphorical baby birds fully equipped to fly by the time that we send them out there. And so if we look at this as our job is fully equipping them, it makes it a little bit easier. Sometimes we talk about like packing their suitcase of, kind of life skills and emotional strength in order to be ready for the rest of their life. And it is an awkward transition, I have to say. When our kids are newborns, they need everything from us. And by the time they leave, we hope that, they want connection and support and encouragement, but that they're not needy to that same degree. And how in those intervening years between newborn and adult we get there, it can look a little bit different depending on every kid and family situation. It's usually a little bumpy, at multiple points along the way, and that is okay. Once again, I'm going to put that plug in there because it is so automatic for loving parents to want to swoop in that that goes against our kids' independence, just like that goes against their resilience. So what do we do instead? If the baby bird, doesn't fully hook it for you, this is actually the mantra that I find personally to be the most powerful. This is the one that I have, kind of come back to time and again myself. Is, we all want to make our kids have smooth, beautifully paved roads that they glide down for life. And wonderful if that happens, but we want them to be able to, kind of traverse whatever terrain they find themselves in. And so this image is one that I try to remember, that I'm not trying to make that, wooden bridge any more passable. I'm trying to help my kids be better bike riders and able to go on their way. A few more thoughts that are directly related to stress and to happiness. One of them is downtime. This is something that you've probably heard about, and you've probably thought, how that sounds great, wonderful theory. How do I actually do it? Why is this so important? The research, again, as we're getting more and more research about technology's impacts in particular on our kids, we are finding that they desperately need to have unplugged free time. They need, they have always needed to have this sort of psychological space, meaning time where they can get bored, meaning time where they can play and figure out their own games. And yes, sometimes, disagree or skin their knees or, kind of have these lower level bumps, if you will. We are seeing more and more the importance of boredom and mind wandering. It has a lot to do with creativity as well as with emotional regulation. And we are also seeing effects on attention spans. And so, this downtime is something that, has been preached for decades by psychologists, but it is always important, and now more than ever. So really examining what your child's life looks like and figuring out where and how much is there this true downtime that is not adult directed. It is not, kind of an organized activity. It is truly free play. So valuable for our kids. There is also so much research on the power of gratitude. I've spent most of today talking about ways to reduce stress. This is the surest fire way to increase happiness, at least to increase mood temporarily. And so why does this work? Why is it so powerful? Practicing gratitude, meaning actively thinking about things that you are grateful for, and in particular, people, because it's even more powerful when it's about people than about things. People you are grateful for literally turns our mind away from the negative thoughts, the fears, the worries, the stressors, toward the positive thoughts, the contentment, the happiness, and our moods follow where our attention goes. And so there are so many ways that parents can build in gratitude practices. You can just have conversations. It's a really wonderful one to model for our kids and make sure that they see it. But it is powerful to build into daily life. This one, I sort of stole this graph from, I don't even know what, I don't know, 15 years ago, because I appreciated the fact that it had all of these different kinds of definitions of success. And that goes back to each of us as a human being charged with taking care of our child or children. We get to have our own values, beliefs, and priorities. And as parents, it is really important for us to tune into them. I used to call it the Starbucks chatter, and I would hear it from parents all the time. And I would feel it myself sometimes, where I would feel like things are, going okay, and I'm feeling pretty comfortable as a parent. And then I go and talk to another parent, and I find out all the things that I'm not doing and my kid's not doing. And I hear all the time from parents how difficult it is for them to be aware, and we are in the age of awareness for sure, with all of the information that's being shared out there about what other people are doing. And I really encourage you as parents and caregivers to tune into your own values, beliefs, and priorities, and use this as your North Star for how to parent and what you want to encourage in your child, because that is what they can learn and experience authentically from you. And it is a powerful buffer to a world full of messages, some of which are quite contrary to emotional well-being. And so we really want to make sure that we are being strong in what matters to us, that we are living our, kind of organizing our kids' lives in accordance to our values. And we also want to make sure that we're helping our kids understand the idea of, I'll say social media in particular, that other people are curating what they are putting out there about themselves. Sometimes they're inventing it. Frankly, it's not real, a lot of it. It is definitely not a full picture of a human life, which is up and down, positives, negatives, fears, worries, insecurities. I don't care who you are. And we want to make sure that we're helping our kids learn how to tune in inwards, and to tune out some of that extra noise out there. I think it's really, really valuable for our kids to hear all different stories of successful adults. And so for us as parents to, we say unmask ourselves, meaning to be human beings and to let our kids know about our own struggles, our own failures. We aren't going to make our kids anxious by admitting that we sometimes feel afraid. We are going to normalize. We are going to show them how to feel those emotions. And, hopefully we're going to show them some positive coping strategies to go along with it. That is the most powerful kind of teaching there is to, sort of model and self-talk out loud so that your kids can hear what you're doing, and to choose to do something that you know to be a positive way to feel better. And another thing that's a great tip is to have your kids hear from other trusted adults, teachers, coaches, whoever they look at in life as being a very successful person, and have them talk about some of the struggles that they experienced along their way. This idea that, sort of, we don't have to go the shortest path down the mountain, so to speak, that most of us have very windy paths that have stops and starts and wrong turns, and we fall over and fall out of our skis, if you will, to really help our kids get that message at the youngest ages. And the last plug I'll put in for this is that reading stories with your kids can be so powerful. Biographies that are written in particular for our youth tend to have baked into it some of the struggle that went into the success. I would look for inventors, entrepreneurs, athletes, people who have had ups and downs, and make sure that our kids are really hearing that message from us and from the wider world, that there is no one right way. And when we get into the spring, and every year, our high school seniors are waiting to hear back potentially from, either colleges or jobs or whatever they're hoping to be their next step. It is a particularly useful point for them to know going into it that acceptance or not, or rejection, is not an acceptance or rejection of them personally. And there is no one right way. There is no one one best path that we just have to put them on and let them ride down the escalator. We want to make sure that we are equipping our kids all along to know that they will be okay no matter what comes. And so to do this, again, for us as parents and caregivers, it's really useful to look long term, not just during their years at FCPS. Often we'll say, like, project ahead to when your kid is 30. Right? That gets sort of out of all of these sort of churning developmental years. What do you want your child to be like? I often will talk to parents about this. And when they answer this question, most of the time they're answering it with characteristics, qualities of a life. They are not giving me a laundry list of accolades that they hope their child has achieved. And so if we can hold on to the bigger goal and make sure that even in these younger years, that we are keeping our eyes on that prize, it can take a lot of pressure off of all of us. And I always encourage parents to talk to someone who they trust, who has kids who are grown, and to ask them, kind of like, what are their sort of lessons learned? What's their best advice? And most of the time, they're going to say, I wish, some variation on the theme of, I wish I hadn't sweated all the little things so much. I wish I had just leaned in and enjoyed that time that I had with my kids more. And so if we take that longer view, it can help. In our book, we talk about this idea of being a gardener, not a sculptor. The idea is that oftentimes when we have a child, we can sort of view them as this, sort of lump of clay or, block of marble, and that it's our job as their caretakers to sort of shape and chisel them out and to turn them into what they will be, if you will. That is a very brittle, anxiety-provoking approach, right? I mean, my gosh, the power and responsibility to be that sculptor and to try to make your kid what you want them to be or what you believe is best for them to be, is kind of terrifying when you think about it. And it's not accurate because our kids come with their own, sort of code, their own temperament, their own wiring, their own inclinations. And for sure, there are important things we can do as a caretaker. And this idea of a gardener, for a plant to thrive, you still need to care for it. You need to water the soil. You need to make sure it's in the sunshine. You want to make sure that there's nutrients and, kind of all of these things. But by not pre-assuming what kind of plant you have, by being able to be open to your child growing into themselves and hopefully, a thriving version of themselves, that is what our job is. And that is how we can best help. And so it's just remembering that we have an incredibly important role, but we don't have to have all of the answers. And it's better, frankly, if we don't. My final thing that I want to mention is going to be sort of at this last slide, like, great, reduce your own stress. But it is true. Number one, emotions are contagious. And so the same way that our kids feeling upset or afraid or stressed out, we can catch it and it suddenly can make us feel those things, but vice versa. And one of the most valuable things we can do for our kids is to offer them calm, to offer them sort of the shelter of their own emotions. Sometimes I'll say, like, we want to be that anchor as our kids are sort of being blown all around by, sort of development and external forces. And, we can actually give them a neurochemical called oxytocin that's the sort of love hormone, the soothing hormone, if we are able to be calm. And so even though I hope you are looking for ways to help your child with their own stress and anxiety, we really need to put our oxygen mask on first as parents. The good news is the things that I have mentioned are going to help us adults. They are human things. And so you can just sort of go back through. And in our book, our final chapter is called this Live the Playbook. And to be honest, we hadn't envisioned it from the outset. It was kind of like the annoying realization that kept hitting us over and over again, is that to help best equip our kids, we really need to take care of ourselves, do less for them, do more for ourselves, and it tends to balance out. So that is all that I have to say formally to you, although I'd be delighted to answer questions. If you're looking for more information, if you want any more information about me, you can go to my website there, and there are links to some of the interviews and media and things that I've done. If you're interested in our book, Raising a Kid Who Can, you can go to that website. You can download a sample chapter for free. And I thank you all so much for coming today and for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tedesco, for all that valuable information that you have shared with us today. I personally have learned a lot, and I believe all our participants today has learned a lot of information. We actually have some questions, and I also encourage people to put more questions in the Q&A. The first question that we have for today is, when thinking about test anxiety and children that choose to not try because they are so anxious about the test, how can I help my daughter not shut down or give up instead of persevering?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And that is the case. When the anxiety and the fear becomes too powerful, we do, sort of shut down. We do, kind of freeze. And we have to make sure that we are challenging our kids' anxiety in increments they can tolerate. And so some of this, what a therapist who would work with an anxious child or anxious person would do would be often to map out what are the fears, right? We'll take a very basic phobia like flying on an airplane or something. The initial step is not going to be go take a flight. The initial step might be think about being on an airplane, because again, that anticipatory anxiety that may be too much. It might be look at a picture of an airplane. It might be like, drive near an airport where you can watch an airplane. These are examples of little sequence steps. And so one of the things we have to do is sort of figure out, kind of what can our child tolerate with their nervous system initially, and view it as a one step along a staircase. It's not sort of all or nothing. We're not going to, the kind of change that tends to actually be enduring and effective is small, gradual, incremental change. It's not sort of a dramatic overhaul. And so when you figure out what sort of is a good first step, that's when you also want to help teach your child about anxiety. Teach them about that, kind of amygdala threat detector. The analogy of a smoke detector is a really good one to use to recognize that we are built as human beings in this really clever way that we are made to survive, and so we are going to pick up on sort of, we're going to become afraid of both things that are genuinely scary and things that are not, but they feel scary. The same way, if the smoke detector goes off, we don't teach our kids to immediately like run screaming, maybe our younger kids, but as adults, we don't like run screaming out of the house, instantly. We use that as an information to say, hey, I got to check, something might be happening. I'd better take a look and see what it is and decide whether or not it's something that is a true danger, or if it's just, a faulty battery or burnt toast or something like that. And so helping your child learn both about the physical reactions in our bodies to feeling afraid, the fact that emotions and thoughts can make our body feel ways, our stomach can hurt, our heart can race. And when they are calm, and timing is everything here, you cannot coach a terrified person into calming down. But if you talk about it at calm moments with your child and plan with them one of those positive coping strategies, it can be something very small. It can just be to, to jump up and down, or, to punch a pillow or something when they feel really angry or really afraid. But if we can plan and practice it with them when they're calm, we can kind of plant that seed in their brain that will make it easier when they feel afraid. So we kind of prepare them for it, and then we figure out what is a low enough challenge that we can, help them grow bit by bit by bit.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Tedesco. Also, we have a question saying, how do parents maintain alignment, conventional wisdom, especially when each one has a different philosophy approach they take with the children? This is definitely a stressor and causes divisiveness.
Yes. Oh, this is a question I encounter all the time in my work with parents. And, no two people are exactly the same. And so when there are two parents or caregivers, there is likely some degree of misalignment. Sometimes it's significant. We have to figure out for our kids, what does tend to align parents is they love and want the best for their kids. And so sometimes it's an informational sort of strategy. So in the case of an anxious child, if one parent wants to, do everything possible to prevent the child from feeling anxious, then information, about anxiety would tell you pretty quickly that's not the most effective strategy. More often, it's a little bit of a difference in temperament. It's a difference in life experience. It's a difference in, sort of style in approach. And, parents don't have to be exactly carbon copies of each other, nor could they be. But they do need to sort of be rowing a boat in the same direction for a child not to feel the difference between them. And, some kids feel distress when their parents are misaligned, and some kids feel opportunity when their parents are misaligned and they're, sort of trying to cherry pick, who to do what with. Regardless, I would encourage parents to keep their eyes on sort of the bigger prize that, kind of where the roadmap, where are you trying to, what kind of kid are you trying to raise? And not, I would say separate the problem from the solution. So focus together if you can. And I sometimes will do this with parents, sort of a list of values, a list of, kind of qualities. Do the hard work yourselves and have conversations together about what do you most value and care about for your child. You may have to do some compromising. You may have to let go of something that you care a lot about in order to respect something your partner cares about. But try to develop a shared bit of a shared goal. And then you can get into the sort of the solution, if you will, the requirements don't need the requirements are the goals, and then the solution you figure out as you go how to encourage that with your day-to-day parenting.
Thank you. With multiple abstinent children, how do we incorporate those coping methods like take a lap or walk up downstairs or sit quietly and read with the response is pouty, shouted no, basically every time?
Yes. I would say a couple of things. Number one, again, the end goal is for a child to both have the awareness of their emotional state and to know what strategy helps them regulate that emotional state in times of distress. But that is that's aspirational, and there are a lot of things to do, to kind of get to that point. And it's going to be a work in progress over, many, 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 many years. That said, again, it has to start outside of the moment of the child being distressed. You have to find when they are at their calmest and begin to have these sort of collaborative conversations where you first validate and empathize with their feelings. Remember that validation sandwich. I see how hard it is for you when I can tell it looks like you feel so frustrated, frightened, anxious, whatever, angry, whatever the word is, when X situation happens. We have to really, again, help them learn to recognize and accept those feelings when they are most able to. And then that is the moment where we can plan with them one of those calm down, sort of positive coping strategies, and give your child some agency. Ask them, they're not going to be able to say off of the top of their head, oh, I should go take a lap or, go up and down the stairs. We can have ideas, but do them in the form of a question like a Jeopardy contestant. What do you think about taking a lap. We might build in a little psychoeducation. Hey, when you have those big feelings, that's energy in your body that you need to put somewhere. So instead of, hurling your backpack across the room, what if you did 10 jumping jacks? What do you think? And then we want to make sure that we are making them feel both, sort of safe in that feeling state, and to show them both confidence and some collegiality, if you will. Like, we're going to share, we're going to be on the same team. We're going to work on this together. It's going to be an iterative experiment. And so we're going to pick one thing, maybe it's jumping jacks, and we're going to test it out. And as the parent, we're going to try to cue them. Oh, looks, I can see it. Looks like maybe some jumping jacks would help. And then we're going to have whatever happens, happens. And if in the moment it's them screaming, no jumping jacks, it happens. We wait until our next opportunity way later to have a rational conversation with our child, not immediately after. And we go through the cycle and we say, look, I can see it must have been so hard. The idea of doing a jumping jack obviously was not working in that moment for you. But that's okay. It'll get better if we keep at it. Why don't we practice it a few times? Do you want to keep with jumping jacks, or should we pick a different thing right now? Let's make a new plan and let's practice it together and try it out. If we keep doing that over and over again, it tends to help shift things. But I am going to give one caveat, which is if fear has gotten to a certain level that the nervous system is just like, on fire, like danger is everywhere, your child really may benefit from professional help. You may too. There is a point at which we cannot coach ourselves out of mortal fear. And that is what the anxious response is. And so, it does happen sometimes that we need to get some external help. The great news is that anxiety is incredibly treatable. It just needs to be treated.
Thank you. My ultimate elementary aged child, autistic ADHD, has a strong connection with us, his parents, but he can be overwhelming at times for the grandparents. Any advice for how to facilitate the strengthening their bonds as we head into the holidays and expect to spend quality time with them?
Such a timely question. Yes, ADHD is an example of what we would call a neurodevelopmental delay. And, there are a variety of those things that can decrease a child's ability to regulate and or mean that they are going to be a couple of years delayed in their developmental trajectory to grow and mature into, sort of some of these to the brain developing, and therefore some of the ways to be able to cope. And so number one, I think I always tell my clients, like, even though I have worked with grandparents and extended family and caregivers, I am not in the business of persuading grandparents, and so I don't have magic words that you can tell. But I would, and there, families vary. I am sure the extended family means well and loves the child and is invested, but they may have their own opinions. And one of the things, if you feel you are able as the parent to do, is to do a little psychoeducation for the relatives and let them know that just because you or their other children or the other grandkids they have or their friends' grandkids or whatever the comparison group may be, just because those kids are able to do X, Y, or Z doesn't mean that your particular child, that is a fair and reasonable expectation or a good fit. And, trying to help the grandparents recognize that the best way to help a child be regulated and behave is not to critique or criticize or to set them up to fail, but actually to kind of see the child as they really are, to be connected in that way, to focus on the child's strengths. And if you as a parent can play to those strengths, for example, if you know your child cannot survive in a restaurant, sitting at a big table in a noisy restaurant for an hour and a half meal, try to, know that in advance and figure out some strategies, right? If your child struggles to sit at the dining room table in your house for the same length of time that the grandparents or other relatives might expect, you can approach it a bunch of different ways. Give your child grace. And let the adults know this is what you're doing in your house. You could try to coach your child potentially, depending on their age and capacity, to give them something to share or to tell to the family that will make the meal a little bit more engaging for them. There's a whole lot of ways to approach it, but you are very likely the most expert person on your child about your child on this planet. And that does bring with it sort of this privilege and responsibility to, kind of try to advocate for them in whatever way you can. And sometimes it's just going back to your child and saying, gosh, I'm really sorry that that happened with, Aunt so and so. She just doesn't understand or remember exactly what it's like to be, or she doesn't know what it's like to be 8 years old today. And we love her, and she loves you, but I am really sorry that she said that.
Thank you. My high energy neurodiverse child loves screens, and besides getting him outside, it's hard to interest him in anything low dopamine at home. We do
Yes.
appreciate that he has to push himself all day at school. How can we get him more interested in quieter activities?
Okay. It's a really good question. And while I don't know the age of that child, I'm gonna just, kind of answer it broadly. And I will say that again, the research continues to emerge on the high quality research that can actually, help us develop guidance. But I think most of us have seen enough to know that screens and that sort of dopamine spiral is really negative for kids. And there are some kids who are much more vulnerable to it than others. And, ADHD, for example, where there are sort of brain chemistry situations where like there is less dopamine and kids are, sort of trying to hack the dopamine in their brain in these various behavioral ways, that is a recipe for technology in particular to provide that dopamine and to become highly addictive and engaging. I have worked with a lot of parents under a lot of different situations, and there are some kids who do better without screens than with screens in low doses. Um, if that is your kid, the way to test that out basically is to try again in an experimental fashion to take a break, a technology break for, a period of time and see how it helps. And it might just be a weekend. I'm not saying like take a month off or something, but, and to help your child recognize, and you can't just preach to them, they'll tune you out, but help them recognize how they felt without it. In cases where we're trying to teach them how to work with technology, which at some point we really need to. So again, younger kids, maybe we do more of we consider whether or not they're yet ready for technology. When we're dealing with high schoolers, they're going to have infinite access to technology soon enough, and we really want to coach them into how to be a good consumer. We want to make sure that they know how their brain works. We want to make sure they know how technology has been nefariously designed, much of it, to prey upon how their brain works. Oftentimes, we can trigger some reactance in a positive way in kids by letting them know that their attention is the commodity that is being bought and sold by technology. That's not going to resonate with every kid, but it can help. And then as parents, establishing clear guidelines and living by them and being trustworthy in our enforcement. Don't set guidelines that you can't enforce. All that does is erode your credibility and your trustworthiness to your kids. Rather, with your kids' help if they're old enough, or, kind of taking expert advice that is out there in the world. American Academy of Pediatrics is a good basic starting point. And sometimes even using your pediatrician as your ally and saying, Dr. So-and-so says we need to keep this in check. Working through it in an iterative experimentation way with your child and not expecting just compliance automatically can be really useful in teaching our kids both how to deal with this really thorny problem, teaching them about themselves, and helping them learn how to regulate themselves.
Thank you. Um, can the anxiety be shown as lying, and what could be a good way to cope with it?
Yes. Lying, there are definitely, it is considered many kinds of lying to be developmentally appropriate in especially in younger kids. Some of it has to do with this idea of like magical thinking. If they've made a mistake and there's like no rewinding time and fixing it, then, it's a form of avoidance, basically, of accepting responsibility and consequences. It's rarely I shouldn't say, much of the time it is not intentional, manipulative, like, they're not out to get the parents or to make the parents look stupid or something like that. And when we're considering anxiety, where avoidance is key, where perfectionism or fear of making mistakes can be very high, if we have a kid who's in that sort of circumstance where they're really afraid of making mistakes, or they just, absolutely think they should never make a mistake, or they're really afraid of what will happen if they acknowledge they've made a mistake, then those are breeding grounds for them not to be truthful, because being truthful is sort of the opposite of avoiding, and they're hardwired to avoid. A basic parenting kind of best practice is don't ask gotcha questions. Like, we're not trying to be like the media trying to like trap somebody. It's much more effective to say what we know rather than to try to bait our kids into admitting something. And so if we just acknowledge, hey, I know this happened, let's talk about it, we sidestep even giving them that dilemma. And for most kids, it is a dilemma. It's not that they feel great about lying. It's just that they feel worse about facing that fear or that anxiety. So trying to set up situations that we're not, that we're helping them rather than inducing them to have that dilemma.
Okay, thank you. Our last question for today. Do you notice elementary age boys and girls sometimes have different stress reactions?
Yeah.
Curious about hormones affecting body stress responses, example, physicality, but not aggressive.
Yes. Yes, gender differences, neuro wiring differences, neurological differences between our kids can change what their sort of go-to default sort of stress response is. Many kids, especially young kids, tend to be what we'll call externalizers. They want to share the pain, right?
Mhm.
They're like sort of taking their anxiety and showing it outward. They're yelling, they're kicking, they're screaming, they're hitting, they're kind of doing very things that we cannot possibly ignore kinds of behaviors. Whereas some of our kids, particularly as they get maybe a little bit older and they recognize they have maybe learned enough body control or enough social norms, or are just more inclined to be somebody to internalize. Kind of our internalizers are the ones that kind of swallow it, suffer silently. It might come out more in the form of headache, stomach ache. Sometimes it comes out as self-harming if it gets really extreme, which is, just trying to sort of not being able to keep the inward pain any longer, and, like sort of trying to make the outside match the inside. There's a whole range of things. Either direction, we want to help, we want to know what our kids' response is. And we want to help them become aware of it and help coach and teach a different, kind of more positive response. And so, there's not like a better or a worse response, frankly. If it's a negative response, that means that it is not solving the problem. It means that it is perpetuating the anxiety and the stress rather than reducing it. We want to help our kids learn ways that reduce it. And so, kind of understanding your own child is really, really valuable. But regardless of where they're starting in terms of how they express their anxious response, we want to guide them toward something that fits them well. And it is true that externalizers often do better with a more physically active positive coping strategy. An internalizer might do better with, more of a like creative expression or a quieter type of positive coping activity. And so we want to make sure that we are tailoring them to fit our kid. I've heard so many over the years. I have heard of elementary schoolers who knit, and that calms them down. And so again, there is no best or worst. It's what fits your kid.
Totally agree. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tedesco, for all the valuable information that you have shared with us today and the great presentation. And thank you all who attended with us today. We will be sharing the recording with everyone next week. And please, if you have questions, reach out to the FRC. Also, please fill out the survey form that we have shared in the chat, and we'll be sharing in the email that we'll be sending you next week with the recording and the information. Thank you and have a great day.